everybody, welcome to another episode of Crush Live Poker. I am your host here, Bart Hansen, and today we are going to be getting into the first episode of kind of a small stakes review that we're going to be doing over the next, say, 6 or 7 weeks with a concentration on missed and lost value. Now, I'm going to be sprinkling in some hands from more of the higher stakes as well, but I feel like over the last 12 months we've done a lot of higher stakes videos, and we have the opportunity to do some smaller stakes videos from Stone's Live Poker up in Sacramento. And this particular video is going to go over some spots from a 1-3 game that was played on Stone's Live Poker, and this is a 1-3 game where I believe they allow you to buy in for 500. So this is sort of akin to the 5-5 $500 cap games that are available in Los Angeles. Now, this video is coming out on May 20th. I want to point all the video subscribers here on CrushLivePoker.com I want to point them to two special videos that we've done this week. One that came out yesterday that's in the tournament section. And this is with a Crush Live Poker subscriber, G. Jacobs, who's a guy that's played thousands, tens and tens of thousands of tournament hands online, and he plays live poker too. And that was going over Hold'em Resources Calculator. So if any of you are going to the World Series this summer, I would highly recommend checking that out. And then there's another video that's going to come out either later today or on Sunday that's going to go over Card Runners EV, which is a very, very advanced topic that Conlon and David Chan have talked about over on Top Section. But I wanted to bring it into the general community as well. It's pretty high level stuff. So, if you're not comfortable with it, you can skip over it. But even if you are, a mid-stakes player, I think, even a low-stakes player, I think it will help your game out a lot. So this particular game is a 1-3 game. We're going to be going over a lot of live spots. As always, you can email me at bart@crushlivepoker.com, bart@crushlivepoker.com, and of course you can click on the little chat icon below the player, and that will get you into a discussion about this particular hand or about this particular video. Now, I've literally been spending weeks making Crush Live Poker commercials for the WSOP live stream that's going to come out in the next couple weeks. So there might be some bells and whistles on this video that we haven't seen in some other videos because I've become so acclimated to be able to do some of the extra stuff that my program that I use to capture live poker screen capture program, ScreenFlow on a Mac does. So we're going to see some blurring. We might see some other stuff. Hopefully it's entertaining for you. So let's get into it here. This is going to be the first hand. Again, this is a concentration here on missed value. Now, some of the angles here are a little bit strange, or it's a little bit different from Live at the Bike and Poker Night in America angles. So sometimes I can get a little bit caught up, or I might be a little bit confused with, who is in what seat, etc., etc. You might see some blurred hands here right now as well, and I'm going to flow through the action as best as I can. Now here we have a raise from seat number 5, Cobra, and the button, Robert, who is in seat 9. So here we're talking about these angles here. This guy in seat 5, opposite to the dealer, has raised to 13. And Robert here has just called. So we've got a raise and we have a call. And we're going to see a flop, and you can see it is 8-3-8 with a couple of spades. You can see here that Robert has pocket queens. So he decides to flat here with pocket queens. This is certainly something that I would not recommend at the smaller stakes of Live No Limit. I will commonly do this against early position raisers in my regular 5-10 game at Commerce against players that I think are pretty good players, where they're opening wide and I feel like I might get them to value own themselves if I just call down pre-flop with a big pocket pair, and then depending on what comes, I might play it fast, and they might think that I might be doing it with a draw. Those types of dynamics at 5-5 and below don't really exist. 5-5 and below are really going to be like 85, 90% value. So if I've got queens here and this guy makes it 13 with about a $500 stack, which is almost 200 big blinds, I don't want to bump him out of the pot, but I certainly would raise him to at least 35, 40 with a very, very high frequency if I was playing small stakes, no limit. Now, we don't see the preflop raiser's hand. We are playing from Robert's perspective. And Cobra here checks. So we're in seat 9 on the button. Cobra checks it over to us. And we bet 16 into 30, which is about a half pot size bet. I would err towards betting a little bit larger than that. I think that I might bet 20 or 25. Nowadays, one of the things that has changed with the game is that even recreational players might not say check fold ace king, ace jack, something like that in this particular spot. I think when the preflop raiser is heads up against you as a field flat caller and he checks, he's not just going to check fold all the time on a paired board. So I might choose a little bit of a larger sizing, especially with this type of stack depth. Now the turn here is the 4 of hearts, and we're going to see a somewhat peculiar play here. Again, we're playing out of Robert in seat 9. The preflop raiser check called on the flop, and now he is going to lead on the turn. So he's going to bet 40, which isn't necessarily a small bet. It's about a 2/3 pot size bet. And then, one of the things I'm going to start to think about is, well, what is this guy doing this with? If I flat called with queens, which I wouldn't normally do in this spot, he's raised from basically what is under the gun 2. How often is he slow playing something big? You don't usually see somebody check call with aces, check call, with kings. If he's opening from that early position and he's a standard player, he doesn't have a whole lot of 8s in his range. So I think that we fare to have the best hand here a lot. But the question is it better to raise here? Is it better to just call here, right? I mean, what type of range is he check calling and then, leading out with when we have queens? He might have picked up a backdoor flush draw with his ace highs. It's probably rare that he has spades. Like I said, it's a very, very awkward type of scenario. And more often than not, I might actually pump this one up here again, make a small raise. It's all about sizing. Make it 95, make it 100. He's never going to really be able to come back over the top. You don't have to worry about it all that often. It's barely even worth talking about a scenario where the preflop raiser opens from +2, we call, he check calls flop, he bets a rag turn, we raise, and then he 3-bets. It's so rare, we don't even have to necessarily think about it. Now, we can just call here in this spot, but we certainly have to be ready to pound, and I mean pound blank rivers when check to make it look like we busted out on spades. Because one of the things here is that if we bet and just call turn, we are basically announcing, even to the most amateurish of players, that we have an unfull, that we don't have an unfull 8 here. Excuse me, is what I mean is that we don't have an 8. So if the river comes out a blank and the dude checks to us, we can bet, and we're going to get called by all kinds of hands because the draws basically have bricked out. Like I said, I don't really know what to think about his range if I'm in Robert's spot. What types of hands does a guy check call lead turn? Because I see it so rarely. And again, I am open to what you guys think at the lower stakes about this type of line. But I still think that queen's fair to be the best hand way more than a majority of the time. And I think that there is certainly a case to be made for raising turn, making it 95 or 100, and betting a lot of blank rivers here too. Now, Robert decides to just call, and the river brings in a backdoor flush. And now, Cobra in seat 5 is going to check. So we have a scenario where this guy raised pre-flop from under the gun 2. We decided to play a slow play pre, which again, I'm not recommending at this level. We just call. He checks the flop, we bet, which is fine. think Robert used a little bit of smaller sizing than I would have. Cobra calls. Cobra leads turn now. Like I said, super non-standard. Something that I can't even remember the last time a guy check called and then led a rag turn. It's very, very awkward and very, very non-standard. One of the types of hands that I would have thought that might have done that would have been like an ace high with picking up the nut flush draw. But when he checks the river now with the 10 of hearts, it's just very, very, very rare that he's ever going to have that type of hand because people are going to check back so much. So what do we lose to here now with queens? We lose to like a trickily played 8. Again, he's raising from under the gun 2, so it's pretty rare that he's going to have that type of hand. We would expect him to bet out with a lot of flush draws here. So, he might not have anything, but the fact that he checks the river means he doesn't have a backdoor flush, and I don't think he's full. And, I'm going to drive this point home again, over and over again, over the next, 6 or 7 weeks when we do these types of videos, that the propensity for people to check raise bluff the river is basically zero. The frequency is zero at these types of levels. So betting the river is almost a free roll, because if we bet and somebody check raises, it's just it's almost never a bluff, almost never a situation where we can call given the pot odds. So we have to take advantage of these types of situations because this level is all about value. Now, could we be value owning ourselves against a hand like aces or kings? It's possible, but this is really where I want to make a bet that has to do with the frequency of I'm getting called. It's unfortunate that the river brings a backdoor heart draw. If the river was an offsuit 10 and the guy checked, we would 100% know that we had the best hand. And I would have figured that the guy might have a hand like 5s, 6s, 7s, 9s, something like that. Here, he might check some stronger hands because the backdoor flush comes in. But, in reality, I think that I would probably bet 65 or 75 and try to get looked up by some type of pair. But like you'll often see, Robert just checks it back. So he misses value pre-flop. Now, we don't necessarily know if Cobra would have called, pre-flop with what his hand is here, which is ace-4 offsuit. But he misses a little bit value pre-flop with a 3-betting. Probably sized his bet too small on the flop. Didn't raise the turn. And if he doesn't raise the turn, he's got to make up for some of that lost value on the river. I think the river is a must bet as played. I probably would have played every single street differently. All right, we're going to get into the next hand here, which really is like, man, it's the epitome of making money at low stakes and not being scared of the nuts. We're not going to do any blurring here because of the fact that there are so many hands involved, but the people that are involved are going to be Loretta here in seat 3 on the button and Robert Y, who is under the gun +3, who had supposedly been playing rather tight. So Robert Y is going to raise from under the gun +3. He's going to open from like whatever, MP1, MP2. And Loretta calls here with 9-8 of diamonds, which I think is perfectly fine. She's getting 25x on the button. So she makes the call. The small blind here, Si Wong calls, and you can see the stack depth of this type of game. By the way, Stones does a match the stack. That's why these games are so deep. Like you can actually go and play 1-3 and buy in for any amount to match the stack. So this is like the crux of like a good 5-5 like LA game, which we don't see all that often. So Robert here, the guy we saw from last hand, is driving this action as the preflop raiser basically from MP2. And we see a board here of Jack 10-3 with a couple of clubs. This is sometimes the problem with calling with specifically 9-8. And that is that the top end of the straight, when it comes in with 9-8, fills ace-king against the preflop raiser. I mean, we don't have to be necessarily worried about like, ghosts under the bed, but it's something to be said for that. So Robert here is going to bet out. And by the way, like, this is not the type of board, if I were to raise with rags, that I would bet out on against three people, which is part of the reason why I'm not raising with this hand at this particular level. If I was playing in this specific game where I was deep at 1-3, I wouldn't be trying to like run people over all that much. You're just never really going to get a ton of folds, and it's very unlikely that you have the best hand here. He makes a continuation bet. Loretta's going to call on the button, and Viet here under the gun, he folds king 10, so he does not overcall, and we are now heads up, and Robert here is going to bet once again. It took a second for the graphics to basically catch up. So this is the type of card that we're talking about here. The turn's a queen of hearts. And if you're playing against like an advanced level type of player, any type of player really that would have a king x of hearts type of hand or an ace x of hearts type of hand would double barrel this turn heads up against what might be perceived against a somewhat of a passive type of player. We don't know anything about Loretta. I'm using that female stereotype. Don't kill me, guys. But if I picked up like, if I had ace 5 of hearts, I mean, I wouldn't be c-betting into 4 people. That's why some of these spots are a little bit weird. But I always like to try to rep ace king, especially if I pick up equity. Robert here is going to bet again, and he's going to bet 75 into 153, and Loretta just calls. Now, it's interesting because she only has 294 left here, whether or not this is a raise or it's just a call, because we always have to be concerned about our perceived range, and I can actually see sometimes just calling here. And the reason why is because if we're just calling, we're hoping for a blank river, and if the guy checks the river, it's an easy bet. The problem sometimes is when you raise when ace king comes in, you look very strong as a field caller on the flop, meaning that like when you're raising, you're always having 2 pair plus, sometimes a set. It's specifically the trouble with 9-8, especially if we had a deeper stack. Robert bets 75 and we call. I would tend, we don't have any blockers for clubs or hearts, which is a problem. But with this stack size, I would still tend to probably just raise and not fold here. I know, yeah, whatever, we're 175 big blinds deep, but I'm not just going to give him ace king when he bets into 3 or 4 people, even though he ended up betting into 3 or 4 people with 10-8. But I know at this level, people aren't folding sets. They're not folding 2 pair. They're not folding kings. A lot of them aren't folding aces. So sometimes I actually have to go thinner at the lower level with a second nut hand just because people just aren't going to fold. He might not fold king queen. So it is what it is. Like, I don't need to do stack protection at this level. I'm probably going to raise right now with 9-8 and just get it in. I'm not going to call and risk some sort of action killer card coming. Now, speaking of action cards, killer cards coming, front door clubs come in here at the end. The 6 of clubs, so it brings in a front door flush. And you better believe if I had played this hand like Loretta, where this guy checks at the end, I am betting 9-8. I don't care. Sure. Does he have all the 16 quote-unquote combos of ace-king? Yes, he does. Is he going to fold them? Probably not at this level, but what about every other hand that he has? Aces, kings, sets of tens, jacks, queen jack, sets of queens, sets of jacks. Forget about it. That's part of the reason why I'm raising turn. But if you're similar to the first hand that we looked at, if you're only going to call turn, if you're going to play a hand defensively in some sort of way, you have to make up for that at the end. Like, there's no way in hell that I'm checking back the river and it goes check, check. She checks it back. Now, because we know that Robert has 10-8, would he call at the end? Probably not. That doesn't matter, though, because there are many hands at a 1-3 game that he might call with, like I said, sets of tens, sets of jacks, sets of queens, queen jack, kings, aces. I mean, it goes on and on and on. You start to do the combinatorics. If you're scared that he might fold out, if you like move all in, make a smaller bet size. But if you're not going to raise the turn, you have to bet the river. So, the moral of this video already coming out, and sometimes I don't figure it out until I get through all the hands, is that if you're going to play, 4th Street defensively, you have to make up for it at the end on the river on 5th Street. So, what we're going to look at right now, I love this hand at so many different levels. This is going to be great to talk about many, many things. If you're skimming over this video, I've tagged this particular hand as like one of the most important hands for multiple different concepts in heads-up pots. So we have this situation here where, again, I'm not going to do any blurring. 1-3, C Wong here out of seat number 4 is going to raise this up to 10, which is somewhat of a small sizing for this particular game, what we've seen. And Jake in the big blind is going to call the extra $7. Whether or not that's going to be a profitable call, heads up, in a vacuum, it's probably not, depending on the type of player Si Wong is, how tight he is. But if you are the type of player in Jake where you are willing to make moves post-flop, it could be. I don't want to wash over pre-flop, but we're going to get into a very, very interesting situation post-flop because of what comes out. So, the board comes out King Deuce 4, as you can see. Now, it might be a little bit of what you would think is a simple spot. Jake checks, and Si Wong bets $10. Okay? So, somewhat standard. Again, like in this game, I might bet a little bit more if I'm Si Wong in this particular situation. But I want you to pretend, for example, Si Wong opened this from late position, or you were in a tournament. I can't stress enough how, unless they are extremely advanced players, how overrepresented king high boards are to continuation bet bluff. And what I mean by that is that if I was your regular player that opened with, say, a hand like ace queen from the cutoff or from the hijack and the big blind called, and I saw this board, the ace queen is going to basically like c-bet this type of board almost 100% of the time. And why is that? It's because people think that the king hits the preflop raiser's range a lot, when in fact, especially the later the person opens from, the later position the person opens from, the king doesn't actually hit his range all that much if he's not opening king X. And the reason why I bring that up is because a lot of people open ace X. So on a board like ace deuce 4, that favors to hit the preflop raiser's range way more than king deuce 4. I'm talking about from late position, because the guy from late position is opening ace X so much more often than he's opening king X. Now, obviously, Si Wong is from somewhat early position here. But if you're looking at this type of board and you call out of position with a hand like 5-4, especially if you had a backdoor flush draw, this is literally one of the absolute best types of hands to either check raise bluff or check call kind of as a reverse float. And the reason why, even though Jake doesn't have a backdoor flush draw here, is because you can call here and you can either check the turn, see what the guy does, or you could check raise flop and you pick up a ton of equity, especially if you're suited here, in the form of a lot of straightening cards coming on the turn. With the 5-4, if a 3 comes, if a 6 comes, if a 4 comes, if a 5 comes, you improve a lot. And you're playing against a situation, this is specifically against a late position raiser, where there's a fairly good chance that your opponent doesn't have a king. Now, if you're playing it against an advanced opponent and you check raise 5-4 on a board like this, they're going to look at this and they're going to be like, what is this guy representing? He's only representing deuces or pocket fours as sets. He probably would have 3-bet pocket kings, so he's not representing all that much. But at this level, people just play their cards. You know what I mean? So this is a very, very good spot to continue on here, either with a call or continue on with a check raise if you think it's going to fold out all pairs above a 4. And even if you check raise and get called and you think that the guy is always going to have a king, there are many, many opportunities for you to pick up equity on the turn. There's a fair amount of cards if we're counting, 4 3s, 4 6s, and then, the other 5 2 pairs and trip types of outs, 10 outs, something like that. And then there's the question of, well, how often is he going to, continue to call? But especially in a situation where a guy opens from late position and you defend with a hand like 4-5 and you see a board like this, it's just so ripe to either be reverse floated or taken away with a check raise. In a tournament, a lot of times I might just call and not risk the chips. The problem is that you give off some free equity with, 2 random overcards that might fold later on. But the point of this is that this particular flop spot is that people represent this board a lot more than they actually have it. Now you can see here that Jake basically just like snap check calls. Boom, turns a 5. By the way, too, in this particular scenario, if I had just check called with 4-5, this is going to be almost an auto check for me on the turn, whether it's a good or a bad player. Now, a lot of you guys know that are familiar with Crush Live Poker, I'm not a huge fan of slow playing, but I think this is the time to do it, because the guy either is going to have a king and he's going to bet again on the turn, or he's not going to have a king, and it doesn't matter. There's no real reason to just lead here, I think, on turn. And even probably more pronounced if there's a front door flush draw. When the backdoor flush draw comes in against an advanced player, they might think that you might be check raising on the come with some sort of pair plus straight draw. But I think, and if it's a bad player, they're going to bet and you can size it small enough where they're going to call anyways. So I love the peel here with 4-5. I really do. Depending on this guy's frequency of betting pairs above 4s on this type of board, you could make the case that check raising could be good too, but at least calling. Like, I'm never folding here. This is the best candidate. Like, I like calling here. Probably it's more valuable to call here with a deep stack than like a hand like probably like pocket 7s, pocket 8s. I'm more comfortable continuing on here with 5-4 than pocket 7s, pocket 8s. Even sometimes pocket 10s, pocket jacks, depending on the types of hands. So Jake's going to check here again. He insta-called. He checked here again. And we're going to look at this from both perspectives here because this is a low-stakes video. If I'm C. Wong, I bet the flop. Like I said, I might have bet a little bit larger. I'm certainly going to bet the turn. I am planning on taking this for 3 straights. That turn card actually increases the probability that my opponent is going to call. He's always probably going to call at 1-3 with any king. Remember, he closed the action. We raised pretty small pre-flop. But if he peeled off with a single pair that was less than a king, like in the form of ace-deuce, ace-4, 5, whatever it is, 4-3, he's going to continue to call. That's actually a really good card for us to continue to get value from a super wide range with ace-king. Because if he called with 5-4 and the turn was like a queen and we bet again, he might just fold. Or the turn was any overcard to second pair, he might just fold. But this fits into the second and bottom pair cards that now pick up straight draws. Types of scenarios, plus 2x, 4x of spades, gut shot spades, whatever it is. That's a really good card for us. If we're C. Wong, again, pay attention to the fact that we have the ace of spades, so he can never have the nut flush draw. So I'm continuing to bet for value. Pot's 41. I'm probably going to bet 30. We'll see here in a second. He did bet 30. Okay, fine. Jake just calls. Now this is obviously a problem. Now if I'm going to just peel with 5-4 with the intention of seeing what this guy does on turn, And part of the reason why this might be a better spot to check raise flop against an early position raiser pre-flop is because of the fact that an early position raiser pre-flop might have a lot of second pair to the board types of hands as opposed to a late position guy that might have just missed. Even though we're giving up free equity against the late position guy, it's not that big of a deal in a cash game. But against an early position guy, if we call out of the blind against UTG2 and we check raise flop, he's probably only continuing on with a king at this level. Higher level guys might peel more lightly because they think that you're repping a pretty thin range if you're never just check raising with a single paired king out of the blind. But at this level, you know what I'm saying. But once this guy bets again on the turn, so if I'm Jake and I decided to just peel, like I said, the frequency might be a little bit higher against early position that I might check raise. But if I just peel with a call, and now the turn brings a 5, specifically now that it brings backdoor spades, and he bets again, at this level, I'm certainly check raising here with these stacks. He bets 30. I'm going to make it like 85. I don't want to blow out aces. I don't want to blow out ace-king. I don't want to blow out king-queen. But I think that it's a very reasonable assumption that when he bets again, 80-90% of the time he has king X, at least. Are we going to run into like pocket kings or ace-3 some of the time? Sure. Very, very rarely. We're not playing that deep. That's going to be a cooler type of hand. But I've watched a lot of low stakes live no limit. And, years ago, you'd be surprised when you check raise here with 4-5, like back in 2007, 2008, the guy might just ship back with a short stack with aces or ace-king or any king. It doesn't matter. Even less than that. You know what I mean? That dynamic doesn't exist as much now in the games these days. He might just call as opposed to ship back. But I would certainly build now when I hit a 5 or a 4, especially when I check and he bets again. There's just no reason to not check raise here and go for stacks. Now he just calls. Again, I would pretty much never play the turn this way. And as played on the river, if I was for some reason just check calling, the only reason why I would check call flop and check call turn would be if I thought that the guy was taking me to value town. Like I was going to take a value own line. Like I was up against a good player where if I check raised the turn, I was scared that he would fold one pair. So if I check called the turn, it would be because I thought the guy might actually bet fold a king. So I check call turn, and if that was the case, then I would check the river. I wouldn't recommend that at 1-3 because I think at 1-3 a guy, I've seen it before, a guy might check back like ace-king here, king-queen, whatever it is. But again, specifically if I check call turn, it would be for the intention of having the guy value own himself and me making a small check raise on the river. Other than that, you could just lead river, but probably not in this scenario. I wouldn't be check calling and then necessarily leading river, because if I was going to check call and be concerned about him not value betting river, I would just make a small check raise on the turn. Now flipping to Si Wong's hand, Si Wong has done absolutely nothing wrong, with the exception of maybe making a little bit of a too small of a sizing on the flop. Once this guy calls the flop, our flop bet, and he calls our turn bet, well, now the draws have bricked out in the form of the pairs plus straight draws, another overcard to what was second pair on the board in the form of a 10. So I'm going to be going for pure value against a king. Like I'm not going to expect to get called by like ace 4 here, even 5-3, something like that. I'm probably going to bet the river at least $75 at a minimum and try to value target a weaker king. And that's exactly what Si Wong did. He bet 75. Jake just basically snap called. Now again, if I were to take a line of just check calling turn because I wanted this guy to value own himself on the river and he were to bet 75, 100% I'm going to put in a raise. I'm going to put it into like 175, 150, 150 to 200. Even though my bluffing frequency is almost nil, it's a 1-3 game. People aren't coming off of aces. They're not coming off of ace-king. Jake lost a lot of value in this hand because I would say 40, 30 to 50% of players here might even check back ace king on the river. Jake got one of the best bricks that he could get where there's going to be a fair amount of people that are going to continue to value bet ace king or aces. But what if the river was, I don't know, like a 10 of spades? Even with Si Wong having ace king with the ace of spades, you would just see people check it back. If the river was any card above a 10, a jack, a queen, they would just check it back. You're losing a ton of value by just check calling flop and check calling turn, with the intention of going for a check raise on the river. And again, if you just check call turn, you have to check raise river. Because if you check raise river, even if Si Wong had ace 3 here, he can't even come back over the top. Or he probably wouldn't at this level. If I was in Si Wong's spot and I had ace 3 and I c-bet flop, I raised pre, c-bet flop, got a call, bet turn, got a call, river came a 10, and then the guy check raised, I would probably play for stacks here because I would think that it's very easy that he could have been slow playing pocket fours, pocket deuces, kings up, something like that. But let's say, for example, I c-bet the flop with pocket fives, got called, bet turn, and then got check raised on river, where I don't beat ace 3, I don't beat 6-3. I very well might just call. I think a better example might be if I flopped, let's say I opened with deuces in Si Wong's spot, bet flop, bet turn, and got check raised on river. It's a clear cut just call. So you can see that from Jake's spot, your range is pretty protected. You're never really going to get re-raised at the end here. Now, occasionally, you're going to check raise and get called, and you're going to lose to like pocket kings or king 10. But if you're worried about like getting to showdown, you're almost never going to get raised back unless your opponent has the nuts. A great hand, though, by the way. And this is just 1-3, no limit. All right, guys, so we have another hand here that is really, really interesting at a lot of advanced levels, even though we're reviewing 1-3 here on the Stones live stream. And this is going to come about where Igor in seat number 7 is just going to limp in here with ace king, something that I would very rarely do unless I had a reason to do it at 1-3. I think ace king is too good to not raise pre-flop. And then we have Robert Y, two people to his left, makes it 16 with pocket kings. Okay, that's fine. So we get a limp here, UTG 1. Robert makes it 16 with pocket kings. You can see the effective stacks are about $615. He makes it 16, and Cobra calls in the big blind. So we see it 3 ways here, with Robert being the pre-flop raiser. Now, one of the things that I will sometimes do, not necessarily as a limper, but I will sometimes call a raise pre-flop with ace king, and I will continue on if I don't hit. This board I would, probably continue on with, especially in position, or like a paired board like 9 deuce deuce against a single pre-flop raiser where I think ace king fares to still be the best hand. I'll continue on to a c-bet, maybe even multiple bets, something like that. This is a little bit strange here because Igor limp called, and now he's going to lead into this board for not like a huge bet. He bets 25 into what was about 49 or 50, so we'll call it a half pot size bet. Now, with a very high frequency at a small game like this at 1-3, where I don't expect a guy to limp call and lead with a very strong hand, and again, I expect this particular player or any particular player, UTG1, to raise with pocket jacks, raise with pocket tens. So when he leads, if he's leading with a strong hand, it is basically only going to be jack-ten suited, which is 3 combinations, spades, clubs, and diamonds, or pocket threes. But usually people check to the preflop raiser. So even though there are 3 combos of threes and 3 combos of Jack 10 suited, how often is he leading in for half pot into this type of board? It's probably like out of those 6 combos, maybe 1 out of the 6, if that, less than 20% of the time. And for that reason, and with the board being somewhat drawy, and being in a 1-3 game where I don't expect a jack to fold, I'm going to be raising with a pretty high frequency if I'm in Robert Y's spot here with pocket kings. Like, I'm going to be raising maybe 75, 80, if not more percent of the time. Now, Robert Y decides to just flat. Okay, Cobra gets out of the way with his 6s, and now we roll to the turn, which is a total blank. The pot is 100. Remember, Robert Y is the preflop raiser against a UTG1 limp call. Igor continues to bet here, and this time he bets again about a little under half the pot, 40 or 50, and Robert Y just calls again. If I had just flatted with kings, which I would very rarely do on the flop, and then I faced another half pot size bet on the turn, I would think that this would be extremely consistent with Jack X, and I would be raising turn here because I wouldn't expect to get a bet at the end. Unless for some reason I wanted to just call and represent like I busted out on some sort of front door heart draw. But that's usually not going to be the best approach to winning the most money at this level, which is a live 1-3 game. So I'd very rarely find myself in Robert Y's spot, raising a UTG1 limp, just calling a half pot size flop bet, just calling a turn bet, etc., etc. Now the river rolls off the queen of hearts, which is quite interesting, and which is why I picked this particular hand to analyze. If I somehow played Igor's hand in this manner as a limp call UTG1 with ace king, and then a lead on flop and a lead on turn, and now all of a sudden I make the nut straight on the river, what would I be thinking about in this $200 pot? Now, No Limit Hold'em is all about playing off of your opponent's range, not necessarily your own cards. But you can get a lot of information about the entire hand based upon your own hole cards. For some reason, if I got into this situation, I would certainly look back at my hand, which Igor did not do. And the important part of this is the fact that Igor has the king of hearts in his hand. And the reason why that is so important, and the reason why I would never check this river as played as some sort of weird bluff flop, bluff turn with 2 overs and a gut shot, is the fact that the queen, the 10, and the jack of hearts are out there. We have the king of hearts. So what possible flush do we lose to? We only lose to some sort of raise that was made by suited connectors in the form of 7-8 of hearts, 8-9 of hearts, which would be a straight flush, something like that. And I would say that with some propensity, or ace X of hearts, like ace 9 of hearts, ace 8 of hearts, and I would say at some frequency, if that person raised with that hand to isolate the UTG1 raiser, he would raise at some point, usually on the flop. So if we play ace-king with specifically the king of hearts in this manner, we basically have the nuts at the end. It is going to be so rare that our opponent is ever going to run into a flush, okay, for us to be scared of. That's number one. Number two, at this level, we can't depend on our opponent making thin value bets. Like Robert's got kings, maybe he has aces. Even if he were to have like pocket jacks, pocket tens, whatever it is. We've seen the earlier hands that I've done in this particular video where he's checked back some strong hands. People at 1-3, they want to go to showdown. They don't want to be faced with some sort of decision. So you can't check this river. He's going to be checking back so much. And even if he happens to run into pocket queens and he bets, and what are you going to do? Just call or make a check raise? it looks stronger than you just coming out and betting. So even though it looks like, oh, well, I led with hearts and now I'm going to check at the end, the guy's going to check back so much. The fact that we've got the King of Hearts in our hand, and when you look at the nature of everything in this hand and the board distribution, you just can't play the hand in this manner. Like I said, I can't imagine coming to the river with this line from UTG1, but if I happen to, there's no way I can check the end. There's no way. Because what, am I hoping that he has ace 7 of hearts that he didn't raise the flop with? And now I'm going to just check call? I mean, you look at this, and I don't know what Igor's thinking, but I am very experienced in like getting into the head of a typical live small stakes player, that usually when somebody checks on the river like this, it's because they're scared and they're going to check call. So say Igor checked and Robert Y bet 125. I can almost guarantee you that Igor would just call, even though it's almost impossible that he loses. So he's checking with the intention of check calling, which is, again, probably very, very, well, it's just not going to be the best way to maximize your value at this level. Now, it doesn't surprise me from what we have seen before that Robert just checks it down. We can talk about, like, if I had flatted with kings on the flop and on the turn, the guy checked the river, it's probably pretty close. I mean, the guy here might be scared of ace king. He might be scared of hearts. He might have bet with jack 10. If he had led with jack 10 or a set, it's very, very possible that he would check the river. And I'm not exactly sure what you would get in terms of value if you bet the river with 2 kings, because probably the bottom portions of his range that you beat in terms of a limp call and leading flop and leading turn would be like king jack. You block that with 2 kings. So you beat ace jack and you beat king jack. And how often are those playing and calling? How often are those playing in this manner of limp calling, betting flop, betting turn, and betting, and check calling river? Like, if he's got ace jack or king jack, is he check calling river all that much? He doesn't really beat anything. So even though I think that Robert missed some value in some of the earlier hands that we went over, I don't mind this check back. But Igor, if he's going to play this hand this way, I mean, you've got to look at your own hand and look at some of the blockers here in terms of figuring out maximum value. All right, so this is going to be the last hand here of this video, and it's going to be dealing with another very thin multi-way value spot. So Robert Y here is going to open this one up for a raise from under the gun +1 with 2 red 10s to 15. He's going to get a call in multiple spots. King 9 of clubs. Jake's going to call here, who's actually going to have the most important hand, UTG 3. Viet's going to call in the small blind with a kind of a short stack with queen jack. Igor's going to call with 7-3 of hearts. And this is commonly what you will see at these types of stakes of 1-3 live no limit. People calling where they're not deep enough, things like that. So the board comes out queen jack 5. Robert, again, the preflop raiser. And Viet checks out of the small blind, which is pretty common, and it gets checked around. So Viet out of the small blind checks, big blind checks, preflop raiser checks this board, which I think is probably a pretty good play when he gets 4 callers. Hot dog checks with king 9 with a gut shot and backdoor clubs, and Jake checks with what is king 5. Now the turn comes the king of hearts, which is a pretty big card when you look at it, because Viet had flopped top 2 pair, and now Jake has kings and 5s, Robert with the bottom end of a straight draw, Hot Dog now with top pair. So now, into a $75 pot, Viet bets. And he bets kind of small, about, we'll see it here in a second, he bets 12, which is sort of strange. When you flop top 2 and it gets checked around and the turn brings a backdoor heart draw, you would think that you would want to lead out for larger, but here he bets 12. And this is what we're looking at here from Jake's perspective. we check back king 5, we call with king 5 suited. Now the guy in the small blind leads out here for 12. The preflop raiser calls. Hot dog calls +2. So we got the preflop raiser. The guy to his immediate left also calls. The guy in the big blind called. He led small. Big blind calls. Preflop raiser calls. This guy calls. And now we're sitting there with king 5. And to be honest with you, because of that bet sizing on the turn, we pretty much know that the guy in the big blind, the guy who's the preflop raiser, and the guy to his left most likely does not have a better hand than we do with king 5. The only one that we really have to worry about is that initial better on the turn, but his sizing is so small. I mean, the only hands that people would think would be the basically invulnerable nuts would be like ace 10 of hearts, something like that, which might be from the preflop raiser, maybe from the guy to his left. But I don't expect, I mean, this looks to be like a hand like a king from the small blind, and then once all these guys call, it's all single paired hands. And the board is so draw heavy that I'm certainly going to raise. So when this guy bets 12, this guy calls 12, preflop raiser calls 12, this guy calls 12, I'm probably going to bump it up to at least 85, if not 100. Jake decides to raise it up pretty small. He makes it 60. The small blind calls Viet, which you can see he flopped top 2. It's very surprising that he actually just doesn't move in here with this stack. That's going to bring in Igor, who's got a small flush draw. Robert Y finally folds, and we are going to see it basically 3 ways. The river is a deuce, and now it's going to get checked to Jake. So he raises the turn, he gets 2 guys out, river's a deuce, and it gets checked over. Again, what are you scared of here? I just don't feel like this guy with this stack, if he was betting with a better kings up in the form of king jack or king queen, would only lead for 12. This all comes back to hand reading. Would he really only lead for 12 and then just call a $60 raise after all the guys had called in between? Probably not. I mean, I understand that all the draws bricked out and it's tough to get value, but you have to put a bet in to get called by a single pair of kings or some sort of weird lower 2 pair, like Viet has in the form of queen jack, or some sort of weird hand like jack deuce of hearts, queen deuce of hearts, something like that. I mean, this is a situation where on the turn against kind of a more reasonable turn range of your opponents, this turn raise could be called like a combo draw. Well, it's not even a combo draw. It's more of just a raise on the turn to get called by draws and then a check back on the river. But because of the unorthodox sizing, once you get called, especially on the short stack here, you have to have the best hand. And I'm going for a single, I'm going for a value from King X here. The pot's 279. I'm going to bet like maybe 100, 125, something like that. It's a 1-3 game. It's all about maximizing your value. So even though I like this turn raise, if you do the hand reading, you have to bet the river small. You absolutely have to bet the river small. I think it is a mistake to check it back, and that's exactly what Jake did. He would have gotten called, obviously, by Viet. I'm still surprised that Viet just didn't shove turn after he bet on the turn. But you've got to look at the situation, look at the bet sizing, and, do a proper hand range in your head. With that, that's going to wrap it up for us this week. I loved this video. I mean, even though it was 1-3, I think it brought up so many basic and advanced concepts. It's probably one of the best videos I've done in a long time. So if you're not subscribers, head over to crushlivepoker.com.